bonkers.
Is that did the British humour fall on deaf ears in the case of Little Britain for the American people? Was it a bit too strange for the American culture to appreciate the Little Britain sketch?
I can only speak for me personally. I mean, I got it. I just didn't like it.
An acquired taste then. Well, moving on, we're going to talk very briefly about somebody we've mentioned quite a few times in this show before, and that's Andrew Crosley. For anybody who doesn't know, and it'd be very difficult for you not to know the name, Andrew Crosley was the sole solicitor in the company ACS Law, who recently took 27 file sharers to court on allegations of copyright infringement. After a big, messy court case and attacks by the anonymous group, Anonymous, he's ceased his attacks. He's ceased his court cases, and the judge was rehearing the case for allegations or costs to be awarded against for the defendants. Judge Burse, who's been the judge presiding over this whole matter, and I don't need to go over the whole story because this has been running now since about, I think it was August last year, has decided that claims can be now made for damages or wasted costs to the defendants, and I believe there's a group action going on as we speak against ACS Law, or what's left of it. ACS Law apparently is ceased trading along with MediaCat, which was the company that they were representing. But I don't know, Gordon, if you've been following this case, I know you've been reading Torrent Freak as well as me, and if you have any comment you wanted to make on this latest development.
It's kind of, it was sort of inevitable. As soon as you see the judge basically turning against him and really slapping him down and refusing to let him dismiss the cases, and it was kind of obvious something was coming. I mean, I kind of resent the idea that he is the one, apparently, that brings the legal profession into disrepute. I mean, there's plenty more before him. There's plenty others, including him. He's certainly not the first, and he won't be the last. But you know what I would love to see? I would love to see a sort of karma-like punishment being handed down. If he's saying, right, if you wanted a £500 settlement out of court, pre-trial, avoid trial settlement thing, if that's your settlement thing, that's fine. That's what your fine is going to be. So for every letter you've sent out, regardless of whether they've paid or not, that's your fine. If you send out, say, 100,000 letters, all demanding £500, well, that's the fee that you've got to pay, and then that's just as a basic punishment. You could even double that to make it a deterrent, so that there's no possible way that you could possibly benefit from this. You could even say, well, that's in addition to paying everyone who did pay you to pay them back and give them a full public apology. You know, something really strong to send a message that there's no possible way you can win out of this. Absolutely no way you can profit out of this. I would love to see that.
I think there's a couple of worrying things that come out of this whole fiasco, and I think, I don't want to use the word credit because it was a result of a distributed denial of services hack on the ACS Law website that created the email leak, which I think started to bring the downfall of this whole speculative invoicing scheme, for want of a better word. But what concerns me now is that we've got the Digital Economy Act hanging in the ether in the UK, and we've seen how much confusion, how much mayhem 27 cases causes when they go to court and there's a dispute, and we've got where we are today because of 27 cases. If the DEA is going to be rolled out for the whole of the UK, and there are going to be people that are legitimately innocent from any copyright infringement allegation, we're going to have a mess on a scale which will be a paper nightmare. It would be a logistical nightmare to run the whole UK and try and tackle mass copyright infringement. Because I think on the grand scale in the UK, there's going to be more than 27 people that are going to be alleged of infringing copyrights. So it just goes to show how complex these cases can be, even with small numbers. And I think it doesn't bode well for the Digital Economy Act when and if it does come into play and comes into play in full force. Roy, I don't know if you've got any comments you want to make on this.
I personally stopped following copyrights in recent weeks for various reasons, but actually I found this is probably more of a coincidence. I found various people who are looking on, basically keeping track of the copyright news, and also Free Software kind of lose interest in the copyright debate recently. And because we've already had a show where we talked about the overlap between the sharing of code that's copyrighted, of course, because even free software is in fact copyrighted in some ways, and that's the reason we can carry on sharing the code. And then you have these companies pursuing people, trying to force them to pay for things that are easily shareable. I basically lost interest in these cases. I think partly because we had this discussion a couple of shows ago. I just find it to be very repetitive. In the case of ACS Law, they aren't the only company that's doing what they do now, and there are some companies that base themselves on an abuse of copyright law and actually maximalism of copyright law, and one of them is Rights Haven. And they, of course, lose the case in a very similar way too. They are being disrespected by the judges, and they don't actually get the courts to really fancy their approach. In the case of Right Haven, I'm not sure if you've seen that. There was a leak or there was a revelation of some sort of what they consider to be the business model. And as soon as that comes out, it turns out this is basically just a bunch of very, very greedy, ethicless lawyers who look for any business model that exploits somebody else's field to give them a reason to exist, basically, and to make more money. It's very similar to what happens now with patents, too, since we mentioned this in the previous segment, where you have those lawyers trying to encourage you to, increase the innovation and to get more patents, and eventually all you actually get there is a tax, a payable tax that usually goes towards monopolies or big companies and the lawyers that represent them. In the case here, this person, he's not actually making any copyright content. He's just looking for a way to get a derivative out of somebody else's work. I'm pretty glad in this case, and also in Right Haven, that the judges actually do have some sanity, which doesn't always happen. Well, in this case, we're talking about a UK case, but in the States, very often you have the appointments from the RAA to the Department of Justice, and there is a very warped sense of justice when the copyright holder is assumed to be, having some kind of a God-given right to impose so-called rights or so-called protection against people in a situation where there doesn't have to be this law. There is this possibility of a market of sharing. And it's really hard to argue against that, of course, because it's kind of like trying to argue against the abolition of drugs. It's kind of like arguing towards doing something illegal, which of course you don't have to do. You could actually argue for a market whose rules encourage people to share, because copyrights are basically a monopoly, and monopolies are not a very beneficial thing to the market. We hopefully will move towards a culture where the copyright holders will have fewer successes in court, and obviously won't be able to just do this provisional kind of invoicing of so-called damages, because that doesn't encourage any creation.
I'm all for people having the ability to protect their work, but their work alone. One of the real things that gets to be a problem here is certain things that used to be perfectly legal, like parodies or fair use and so on and so forth, are just going out the window. I mean, I work as a webmaster, and I don't know how it works in the UK, and Tim and I have talked about this once or twice, but not in detail. But over here, there's basically, if you're dealing with anything that is copyrighted by somebody, you basically allocate a certain percentage of your budget for ambulance chaser blood money. Because they'll come to you and say you've done an infringement that you haven't, and you give them the money to make them go away. If you don't, they file DMCA and all these other things and basically get your ISP to take your site offline, and then you have to countersue them to prove you were innocent.
Yeah, you have to give your details too, and of course, then they can actually face damages if you do file, if it turns out to be a false DMCA.
Yeah, but if you're running a business online, being offline for 6 to 24 months while the courts straighten this out costs you way more money than their blood money they're asking for. These people have gotten very smart about saying, give us this much money because it's 10 cents on the dollar what it'll cost you to make me go away through the courts.
Yeah, I suppose this is one of the reasons people will go to things like Getty Images or whatever, because they just want the safety of. But of course, they